In August 2013, a computer engineer from Newport, Wales, was tidying up his home office. He had 2 hard drives sitting on his desk. One was blank. One contained the private key to 8,000 Bitcoin. He reached for what he thought was the blank drive, put it in a plastic bag, and left it in the hallway for his partner to take to the tip. She took the wrong bag. By the time James Howells understood what had happened, the hard drive was buried under 4 months of landfill at the Docksway Municipal Waste Facility in Newport. At the time, those 8,000 Bitcoin were worth roughly £500,000. A meaningful sum, but not catastrophic. At the time of this video, they are worth approximately $750 million. This is not a story about a theft. It's not a story about a hack or a con or a state-sponsored cyber operation. It's a story about a single moment of human error. The wrong hand reaching for the wrong object in an ordinary home office on an ordinary afternoon. And the 11-year odyssey that followed. It is also, depending on how you look at it, a story about bureaucracy, about environmental law, about the legal definition of ownership, about what it means to possess something that exists only as a string of numbers and cannot be recovered without a specific piece of hardware that is currently buried under thousands of tons of decomposing waste in South Wales. To understand this story, you have to understand what James Howells actually did in 2009. Howells was one of the earliest Bitcoin miners on record. He began mining in January 2009, within weeks of the Bitcoin network going live, using a Dell laptop. He was running the mining software overnight, intermittently, for roughly 2 months. By the time he stopped, he had accumulated approximately 8,000 Bitcoin. At the time, Bitcoin had no established market price. It was an experiment, a curiosity, something a small number of technically minded people were playing with in the margins of the internet. He stored the private key, the cryptographic credential that grants access to those coins, on a hard drive inside the Dell laptop. Over the following years, as he updated his hardware and moved on to other computers, the drive sat in a drawer. Bitcoin rose, fell, and mostly sat dormant in public consciousness. Howells didn't think about it much. Then, in the summer of 2013, during a house clearance, he made his mistake. He had 2 similar-looking drives. He thought he was throwing away the blank one. He wasn't. When he realized what he'd done, some weeks later, as Bitcoin's price began its first major climb, he drove to the Docksway Landfill in Newport and asked if he could look for it. He was told that was not possible. The material had already been compacted and buried. What followed is one of the most remarkable and quietly heartbreaking campaigns in the history of cryptocurrency. Over the next decade, Howells assembled a plan. Not a vague, hopeful plan. A detailed, technically sophisticated, fully funded plan. He brought in data recovery specialists. He commissioned AI-driven site analysis to model where within the landfill the drive most likely sat, based on the timing and sequence of waste deposits in mid-2013. He proposed using industrial excavation equipment, robotic systems, and environmental containment measures to minimize disruption to the site. He offered Newport City Council money, a lot of money. At various points, he offered 10% of the recovered Bitcoin's value to be spent on community projects in Newport. That offer grew. He eventually offered 25%, approximately $180 million at current valuations, to the city in exchange for permission to dig. Newport City Council said no. Every time, their position was consistent. The council's environmental permit prohibits excavation of a closed or operating landfill site. Digging would disturb the site's containment system, potentially releasing methane, asbestos, arsenic, and toxic leachate into the surrounding environment. The costs of excavating, storing, and safely processing the displaced waste would run into tens of millions of pounds, with no guarantee of finding the drive, and even less guarantee that it would still be functional after more than a decade underground. The council also raised a legal point that would eventually prove decisive. Under Section 14 of the Control of Pollution Act, 1974, anything deposited at a local authority waste facility becomes the property of that authority. The moment the hard drive went into the landfill bin, the council's position was that it became theirs, not Howells's, theirs. Howells rejected this entirely. He argued he never consented to disposing of it. His partner took it by mistake. You cannot lose legal title to property through an accident. His legal team filed suit. In May 2024, Howells formally filed a claim against Newport City Council in the High Court, seeking either legal access to the landfill or £495 million in compensation, equivalent to the Bitcoin's value at the time. The council immediately moved to have the case struck out. There was a hearing in December 2024. Howells's lawyers argued he retained intellectual property rights over the Bitcoin he had mined, and general property rights over the physical hard drive. The council's barristers countered that under existing waste law, ownership transferred at the moment of deposit, and that the claim was, in any case, time-barred. A potential plaintiff cannot sit on a legal claim for over a decade and then bring it as though it were fresh. On January 9, 2025, Judge Kaiser K.C. issued his ruling. The claim had, in his words, no realistic prospect of success at a full trial. It was dismissed. The judge noted that even setting aside the ownership question, the retrieval itself presented near insurmountable practical obstacles. Over a decade, underground, in a compacted municipal landfill, exposed to moisture, chemical breakdown, and physical pressure, an electronic storage device would in all probability no longer be functional. The magnetic platters on which data is written are extraordinarily delicate. They are not designed for conditions found at the bottom of a landfill. The judge was not persuaded that retrieval was realistic. Howells disagreed. He has maintained that modern data recovery techniques, applied to a drive that was sealed in its original housing, give a meaningful probability of success. He has cited specialist opinions suggesting the glass platters inside the drive could survive landfill conditions intact. He has pointed to successful recoveries from drives that were in fires, floods, and other destructive environments. But the legal road in the UK courts is now closed. The judge's ruling cannot be appealed in the same jurisdiction on the same grounds. There is one further complication that adds an almost cruel dimension to the story. Newport City Council has announced that the Docksway landfill site is approaching the end of its operational life. Plans have been approved to cap and close the site during the 2025-26 financial year and convert part of the land into a solar farm. Once the site is formally capped and sealed, any excavation becomes exponentially more difficult, and any legal argument for access becomes even harder to make. The window, if there ever was one, is closing. Howells has said he intends to explore every remaining option. He has mentioned the possibility of taking the case to the European Court of Human Rights on the grounds that his property rights under the European Convention have been violated. He has also announced a documentary deal to tell the full story of the search, the technical planning, the legal battles, the environmental arguments. In November 2024, When Bitcoin briefly crossed $100,000 per coin, Howells' lost fortune touched $800 million. In that moment, his was one of the most valuable single holdings of Bitcoin on the planet. Technically, legally, and physically inaccessible. Let's sit with the mechanics of this for a moment, because the thing that makes this story genuinely unique is not the dollar amount. There are richer people than James Howells. There are larger losses in financial history. What makes this unique is that the money is real. It is located on a specific physical object. That object is in a specific physical location, and it cannot be accessed. In traditional finance, if you lose a savings account number, a bank can verify your identity and grant access. If you lose a stock certificate, a transfer agent can reissue. If you lose a gold bar, you've lost the gold bar, but similar gold bars can be purchased. Cryptocurrency has none of these fallbacks. The private key is the only path to the funds. There is no bank. There is no customer support line. There is no court order that can compel the blockchain to give the money back. If that hard drive is destroyed, or if it decays beyond any possibility of data recovery, 8,000 Bitcoin are gone. Not stolen, not transferred, not held anywhere else. Gone. They will sit in their wallet address on the blockchain forever, acknowledged by every node in the network, permanently inaccessible to anyone. As of now, James Howells is considering his options. The landfill is closing. The drive is still there. The Bitcoin are still there. And the gap between what he knows is real and what the law says he can do about it is, by any measure, the most expensive gap between knowing and doing in the history of the digital age. If you want to follow this story as it develops, and it is not over, subscribe, because whatever happens next, it will be worth watching.